Hey, what's good everyone? It's your boy Don Agati bringing you the next installment of the Sonic the Hedgehog Mega Review. Today, we'll be looking at a game that holds a very special place in my heart, you know. Not only was it the first Sonic game I've ever played, but it was also among the first video games I ever played in my entire life. In my last video, I covered the original Sonic the Hedgehog, a game that had its flaws, but overall I thought it was a great experience. That game during its time was revolutionary, and it managed to compete with the likes of Nintendo, which no other platformer at the time was able to do so. Today, we'll be looking at the sequel to the first Sonic game, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which was also released on the Sega Genesis just 1 year after the first game in 1992. Like most sequels you see in video games, Sonic 2 built off the foundation laid by Sonic 1, and improved upon it while also removing things from the first game that didn't work. So, without further ado, let's get this Sonic the Hedgehog 2 review started. For all of you who also grew up playing this game, that title screen is just pure nostalgia, isn't it? Sonic 2 immediately stands out in comparison to the first game. The colors are much more vibrant and lively, and though the title screen uses the same jingle as the first game, you can tell that things are much more different this time around, but I'll get into that later. For now, I'll talk about the story for this game. Like Sonic 1, there are no in-game cutscenes or anything like that, and for a young kid playing this game back in the 90s, the story was pretty much up to your interpretation. That is, unless you decided to read the manual, which I can imagine a lot of children back then didn't. Similar to the first game, this game's story is fairly straightforward. However, you can tell that Sega put a lot more depth into this game's story when you look at the manual. Now before any of you ask, I chose to read the Japanese manual for this game, just because I feel like it offers a more accurate representation of what the original vision was for this game. After the events of Sonic 1, or I guess Sonic CD if you think that takes place before Sonic 2, Sonic hops into his favorite plane, the Tornado, in search of a new exciting adventure. However, Dr. Eggman, having been defeated by Sonic, decides to follow him in order to enact his revenge, and they both end up in a place called West Side Island. After a few days there, Sonic noticed that someone was following him, a little fox named Miles Prower. However, due to him being born with two tails, everyone on the island calls him Tails. Young Tails was often bullied because of his extra tail, but after seeing Sonic, and his carefree, never-give-up attitude, it inspires him to chase after Sonic. And after Dr. Eggman starts to attack the island, turning the inhabitants into robots, Sonic springs into action, and Tails follows right behind him, which starts off Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, for a game that came out in the early 90s, you gotta love how Sonic, despite having limited hardware, still tries to tell a story at the end of the day. The story might not be as complex, or even as well written compared to other games during the time, and I think that an in-game cutscene or two could help to make things a little bit more clear, especially to an audience of children. But for a game with no dialogue, Sonic 2's story does the story from Sonic 1, but better in my opinion. Not only that, but introducing a new character into the series this early really shows that Sega during this time wasn't playing around. They wanted to expand the Sonic brand, as well as the world of Sonic as much as possible, turning Sonic from a simple mascot into a multimedia icon that people instantly recognize. So with the story out of the way, we can move on to the actual game. So right off the bat, I want to talk about the actual mechanics of this game and how it improves upon the Sonic formula established in the previous game. Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1 was a masterfully designed stage, in which the player can mess around with Sonic's physics and get used to the momentum-based movement system. In my opinion, Emerald Hill does everything that Green Hill does, but better, dare I say. In terms of level design, this stage is fairly similar to Green Hill, but there are a lot more alternate routes that the player can go through. What you'll notice about this stage is that there are a lot more loops and enemies, teaching you the importance of keeping your rings while also keeping a constant flow of speed as you move through the stage. When diving into the game proper, you'll find that in terms of pure control, Sonic basically has the exact same controls he had in the previous game, which, in this case, I actually think is a good thing. Like the previous game, Sonic can jump and roll into a ball, which allow him to defeat enemies. However, for this game, there are two critical changes to Sonic's movement. First off, you'll notice that when moving on the ground, Sonic's speed compared to the first game is a lot faster than it was. That's because in Sonic 1, Sonic could move pretty fast, but its speed had a cap, which meant that he could only go at a set pace on the ground and in the air. In Sonic 2, however, these speed caps have completely been removed, and as a result, Sonic can go fucking fast, man. I mean like, crazy fast. So fast that he can even outrun the camera in some segments. As for the second critical change, as many of you know, this game is the debut of Sonic's most iconic move, the spin dash. With it, Sonic spins rapidly, almost like a buzzsaw, and upon releasing the button, Sonic travels with blistering speed, while also destroying any enemy he comes in contact with. This ability completely changes the game, and it allows the player to gain speed almost instantly. In Sonic 1, the game was a lot more punishing when it came to gaining speed. If you were to say, go up a slope without enough speed, you would be stuck and have to manually make your way up through either platforming or running back and gaining more speed. In my opinion, the spin dash just helps to make the pace of the game that much faster, and honestly, Sonic 2 is a better game just off that alone in my opinion. But besides that, the spin dash is the only real new mechanic in this game. Sure, there's a lot of other things that have been added to this game, but in terms of pure control, that's pretty much it. So I guess now's as good a time as any to talk about the new character introduced in this game, Miles Tails Prower, aka Tails. Now when I was a little kid, I used to like Tails a whole lot more than I liked Sonic. Like, he was my favorite character in the entire series. But I guess that's just because, similar to Tails, I was a little kid and so I kinda related to the guy. Because of that, I used to play as Tails a lot more than I played as Sonic. But from a technical design standpoint, him and Sonic quite literally have the exact same moveset. I remember being so disappointed as a kid when I found out Tails couldn't fly in this game. It's not until Sonic 3 that Tails gets his ability to fly, but in this game, Tails is just a clone of Sonic with a smaller hitbox, and that's it. You can have Tails as your companion during the game, in which he'll just follow you around and occasionally defeat enemies, if you're fucking lucky that is. But in reality, Tails more often than not just gets in your way, especially during boss fights where he will literally cause you to die half the time. Though Tails is a hindrance in most situations, I do have a soft spot for the little guy, and for that very reason, I choose to tend him and Sonic when I play the game, against my better judgment. And with that, I think that covers all the mechanics of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Of course, there are some returning elements like shields and the speed shoes, and the ring system remains basically the exact same. But besides that, Sonic 2 keeps things simple, which, for a sequel, I actually kinda like. Now back to the actual stages. We move on to Chemical Plant, and I've gotta say, the spike in difficulty from Emerald Hill to this stage is noticeable, even for a veteran Sonic player like me. Now, that's not to say Chemical Plant is a hard stage. In fact, the first act is actually easier than both acts of Emerald Hill. It's just that Chemical Plant is one of those stages that punishes you for mindless play. In Emerald Hill Zone, you could basically get through the entire stage by just moving to the right without too much trouble. You might take some damage, but you'll survive in the end. Chemical Plant, however, teaches the player a brutal lesson by having traps all over the place. Some passive, some not so passive. It's for that very reason that I find Sonic 2's level design to be much more geared towards the idea of replayability than Sonic 1's level design. For instance, look at the swinging platforms in Aquatic Mine Act 2, where you need to slow down in order to get to the top path and skip the entire underwater section. Or take this section in Oil Ocean where it looks like you're going to get crushed, but it turns out to be a clever little shortcut. Or take the entirety of Metropolis Zone where enemies are placed in the most inconvenient areas to ensure you're having the most amount of fun. The game is full of designs like this, and for better or worse, it makes the game that much more complex compared to its predecessor. Not only that, but this game also has some pretty neat set pieces too, like Sonic riding on top of the tornado while Tails pilots the thing. And as much as I fucking hate Wing Fortress, I gotta say, visually, it looks incredible for a 90s action game. And to top it all off, Sonic going into space for the first time was the coolest thing ever when I was a kid. But besides all that, I'd say Sonic 2 is just a better version of Sonic 1, and thus I have a greater incentive to play this game compared to that game. That's not to say I hate Sonic 1, far from it actually. It's just that Sonic 2 improves upon everything that I care about in the Sonic game, thus making it a better overall experience. And with that out of the way, we now move on to Aquatic Ruin Zone. Now, I don't like this stage as much as the previous two zones, but I do think this stage has some unique aspects that makes it stand out. As far as I'm aware, this is the only water level in Sonic history where you can completely skip the underwater segments through skillful play, resulting in you getting through the stage quicker. From a visual perspective, I absolutely love the way this stage looks, blending the lush green leaves with the golden stone-like ruins, as well as the tranquil blue sky in the background. Not only that, but I'd like to point out that the theme song for this stage is a fucking banger. Just give it a listen. Now, Now, this is one of the rare instances where the music and the stage go together perfectly in my opinion, and that doesn't just go for this stage. As a matter of fact, I'd say Sonic 2 has a pretty good lineup of stages compared to the first game. Sonic 1 only had 6 stages with 3 acts per stage, while Sonic 2 on the other hand has 9 stages with 2 acts per stage. Overall, both games are about the same length, having 18 acts in all. But I've always felt that Sonic 2 managed to do what Sonic 1 couldn't, cramming in a lot more content with its 18 acts compared to Sonic 1, resulting in my opinion, a much better package. Now, in my previous video, I said that the bosses were the weakest element in Sonic games, and yeah, I still stand by that sentiment. And honestly, that goes double for this fucking game. Sonic 2's bosses are just as bad as Sonic 1's in my opinion. The main thing I find offensive about these bosses is the fact that it doesn't challenge the player in any meaningful way. Aside from the boss in the Casino Night Zone, which I actually think is pretty good, every other boss just repeats the same cycle of just hit the guy 8 times and he dies. That's it. Which in itself isn't a necessarily bad formula, it's just the fact that these bosses in itself are not hard, thus I have no incentive to want to replay them or get better at them. And with the ring system, that just makes an already easy boss that much easier, unless you have 0 rings. And don't even get me started on the final boss, which I'll talk about later in this video. Next, we move on to Casino Night Zone. Now, from a visual point of view, this stage is absolutely fucking beautiful, man. And it's home to some wonderful set pieces too. For instance, the city in the background is absolutely wonderful, the colors are vibrant, the music is fucking banging, and overall the stage just looks amazing, especially for a game that came out in 1992. However, from a level design perspective, this stage is absolutely fucking annoying, man. Like, I understand what they were going for when they were designing this level, but the pinball table level design only serves to make the stage take longer than it needs to. And as someone who likes to speedrun these classic Sonic games, this is the stage that I go to and I'm like, what the fuck were they thinking when they made this stage? Especially when shit like this happens. The cherry on top of all of this is that in most cases, the slot machines and pinball tables only serve to add to your score, which is quite literally the only thing in this game that I don't give a fuck about. So, overall, Casino Night, beautiful stage, terrible execution. Though I will tell you something that is executed well, and that is the soundtrack of this game. Now, I don't think it's too surprising that I find the Sonic 2 soundtrack to be way better than the Sonic 1 soundtrack. And for me personally, that just comes down to how well the music fits the stage that I'm playing. Sonic 1's music is pretty good, but I always felt that some of the tracks just didn't fit the stage that I was playing. Even then, I always felt that Sonic 2's soundtrack just implemented a lot more complex instrumentations compared to Sonic 1, which had very basic instrumentation in comparison. Now, I'm not the best judge when it comes to music, but all I'm gonna say is that Sonic 2's soundtrack is way better. In my humble opinion, of course. Sonic 2 definitely has a lot of back-to-back hits, such as Like I said before, Sonic 2's soundtrack is great. And with all that said, we've reached the halfway point of Sonic 2, and I haven't even talked about the Chaos Emeralds yet. In my last video, I briefly talked about the special stages, and how most people can agree that they are some of the worst the series has to offer. But for this game, Sega found a way to make them even worse, as Sonic 2 introduces a new kind of special stage, the half-pipe special stages. And I gotta tell you, even as someone who's beaten Sonic 2 countless times, I can never ever get used to these special stages. And for some reason, Sega keeps bringing back this type of special stage. Why? What makes these special stages so god-awful is the fact that the render distance makes it to where you can't see what's coming up ahead. Thus, it creates a very negative gameplay loop in which the player fails multiple times until they figure it out. Which in itself isn't a bad thing. As a matter of fact, as I said before, Sonic is built on replayability. But let's be honest here, who the hell wants to replay these special stages? Now, to give the game some credit, the way you access these special stages is way better than it was in Sonic 1. Here, all you have to do is collect 50 rings, hit a checkpoint, and then jump into the stars that flash above. This new style of entering the special stage creates far more chances for you to collect Chaos Emeralds than Sonic 1. But that also means that you're probably going to have to backtrack if you want to get all the checkpoints with 50 rings. Also, unlike Sonic 1, this time around there's 7 Chaos Emeralds instead of 6, which means that you have to play 7 different special stages in order to get all the Chaos Emeralds. And like I said before, these special stages are inherently terribly designed, and thus I don't want to play them at all. Now I understand that in later versions of Sonic 2, the render distance has been completely improved, making these special stages actually playable. But for these videos, I like to play the original version of the games. And even still, there's one thing about these special stages that is bad in any version of the game, and that is Tails' fucking AI. Now, like I said before, I don't mind having Tails around in the normal gameplay since he's mostly harmless. But for the special stages, Tails can ruin your entire run by getting hit just once. See, the main objective of the special stages is to collect a certain amount of rings under the time period. Now, that wouldn't be too bad, by yourself that is, but Tails makes things so much worse because he can collect rings too, and his rings add to your total, so if Tails gets hit, you lose rings, and if you lose a certain amount of rings, you don't get the fucking Chaos Emeralds. Now, what makes Tails' AI so bad is the fact that when you jump, Tails jumps a split second after you, so if you barely miss a bomb, you better bet that Tails is gonna hit it. Now, this isn't too much of a problem if you're playing by yourself, which I would pretty much advise, especially if you're going for the Chaos Emeralds, but I feel like this shouldn't be a problem to begin with. Tails should literally just jump at the same time that you jump. But I guess that would be asking too much of a 1992 platformer, so it is what it is. But once you do manage to get past the shitty special stages, unlike the previous game that just gave you a true ending, this game actually rewards you for your efforts in the form of Super Sonic. And at this point, if you're able to unlock Super Sonic, that makes the game pretty much a cakewalk. Super Sonic is invulnerable to damage, he can jump twice as high, he's super fast, and you only need to collect 50 rings in order to unlock him. The only things you really need to look out for are getting crushed, drowning, and falling down a bottomless pit. Now, for the most part, I like Super Sonic. I think that he's a good reward for this game. Though, for a more advanced player like me, I don't really have time to go and collect all the Chaos Emeralds, as I can pretty much get through the stages in like less than 1 minute, so Super Sonic, he's a good reward for like the beginner players, but for more advanced players, they won't bother to get the Chaos Emeralds for the most part. I will say this though, as someone who usually doesn't get the Chaos Emeralds, the last 4 stages of this game are pure agony in my opinion. Everything that came before was pure sunshine and rainbows before you get to Oil Ocean Zone, where you'll be forced to deal with things like terrible enemy placement, questionable level design, spikes, these platforms that shoot out the ground, and oil that can kill you in a matter of seconds. Now this is one of the stages where I find it more annoying than hard, but this is a really annoying stage. Oh, and if you thought that was bad, just you wait for the stage that comes after it, as Metropolis Zone is everything wrong with 2D Sonic given form. With Oil Ocean, the enemy placement was bad, but it never felt like it was intentional. With Metropolis on the other hand, enemies are purposely placed in the most inconvenient areas, and for once, I feel like the game is actually being unfair. And even as someone who's played this stage before multiple times, some of this shit cannot be avoided, which in my opinion discourages replayability, and ultimately I just want the stage to end. Oh, but it gets far worse, as unlike all the other stages in this game that have 2 acts, Metropolis for some reason, has 3 acts. Why? The reason they decided to do this, I have no fucking idea. So overall, whenever I have to replay this stage, when I get to Metropolis, I know I'm gonna have a bad time. And that's because I just think that Metropolis is inherently a poorly designed stage where the developers were clearly trying to amp up the challenge, but only ended up reducing the fun in the end. So yeah, Metropolis, worst stage in the game, by a wide margin. And with that, we've reached the climax of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic decides to hitch a ride on this plane, the Tornado, with Tails flying it, as they make their way towards Dr. Eggman's ultimate weapon of destruction, the Death Egg. From this set piece, you can tell that the stakes in this game are much more dire than they were in the first game, and that's just one of the core inherent strengths of Sonic the Hedgehog's storytelling, in comparison to things like Mario or any other platformer during the time. Sonic stood out, as I said before. It was willing to do a lot of things that other platformers during the time were not willing to do, which is what made Sonic the Hedgehog so great to begin with, as I said before. Now, back to the actual gameplay. From a storytelling perspective, this is cool and all, but from a gameplay point of view, Skychase is just a boring, slow-paced auto-scroller, and Wing Fortress is my least favorite stage in the game, despite Metropolis Zone. Quick editor's note, after having replayed this game for this video, I actually don't agree with that opinion anymore. I actually find Wing Fortress to be a pretty cool final level. It's just that before, I never realized that these flames right here, yeah, they don't damage you. So I was taking my time trying to get through the stage without getting hit, and without realizing that these flames can't hurt you. So this stage is actually a quick cakewalk. So Wing Fortress, I don't hate anymore. Just editor's note done. And with this, we then move on to the final boss of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and you'll immediately notice that just like the final boss from the previous game, you're given no rings this time around. However, unlike the first game, where it felt like having no rings helped to complement the boss, here, having no rings only adds to an artificial difficulty, making the already not so fun bosses even less fun overall. Not just that, but unlike Sonic 1, which only had one boss to deal with, Sonic 2 gives you 2 terrible bosses back to back, with Silver Sonic being a boss that you can literally beat in like 20 seconds, and the Death Egg robot being a complete pain in the ass to deal with. Seriously, like, first off, the hitbox on this thing is extremely picky, meaning that if you happen to jump on it in like the wrong angle or some shit, you instantly die. Leading me to wonder how anyone in 1992 was able to beat this thing back then. And the worst part is that every time you die, you have to fight Silver Sonic all over again, completely killing the pace of the game. And the cherry on top of all of this is that if you get a game over here, that means you're playing the entire game again in order to get even a chance at being this boss. Like, this isn't fun. It's just obnoxious and a stain on an otherwise amazing game. But once you memorize the boss patterns and manage to defeat this thing, the Death Egg begins to self-destruct as Sonic jets out and manages to escape. And if you manage to collect all the Chaos Emeralds, then you get a good ending where Super Sonic descends back to Earth with Tails in the newly repaired Tornado flying right beside him. However, if you didn't get the Chaos Emeralds, you got the bad ending, which is, in my opinion, the superior ending. Then, Sonic will be falling down to Earth from space helplessly, and this is the only time in-game where you get an actual fucking cutscene, by the way, showing Tails not being the scared little kid that he was at the beginning of the game. He hops into the Tornado, and in an act of bravery, comes to Sonic's rescue. Now, I've always found this moment to be rather touching, even when I was a little kid. It was so cool to see this character that had been following you around for the entire game finally coming to his own by the end of it all, cementing Tails as a mainstay character for the rest of the Sonic series, and one of my favorite characters of all time. And with that, the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 review comes to an end. Now, what can I say about this game that hasn't been said plenty of times before? I think this game is incredible. Everything I love about Sonic 1, such as the level design, the music, and even the storytelling, is brought into Sonic 2, but it's just done so much better. Having cool, exciting set pieces, incredible level design, and a soundtrack that can get me lost in the experience. Sonic 2, just like Sonic 1, is a game that I've been replaying countless times over the past 10 years, because it's just an amazing experience overall. Is it better than Sonic 3? That's debatable, but I'm leaning more towards no. But either way, Sonic 2 is the game that introduced me to the world of video games, and for that reason, I can say without a doubt that I love Sonic the Hedgehog 2.